I'm welcoming everyone. I know many of you, not everyone, but it's really great to be able to have this opportunity to talk about this film that the three of us, Raven, Roz, and I have been so involved in for quite a while. I happen to be the person of the three of us who's actually on the cultural committee that is hosting tonight's event. And, but I was also one of the executive producers on the film that we're discussing, and I'm also the moderator tonight. So I'll keep things going, and hopefully we'll have a nice, a good, vital discussion about this. The Cultural Committee, as many of you know, but not all of you, is focused on art that engages politics, art that exposes injustice and illuminates progressive visions. Last November, when the film was first broadcast on CBC, I let people on the Cultural Committee know about the film, and many of them got back in touch with me, having seen it, with the gratifying and responses to the film and suggestions that we have a public discussion like this. So here we are. One of those enthusiastic responses came from one of our fellow members, Leo Panich. In fact, it was at our last meeting in November 30th in 2020 that he made sure that the idea for having this discussion got onto the agenda of the meeting, and it sort of slipped off and he pushed it back on. Unfortunately, 3 weeks later, Leo died after contracting COVID-19. And which was a terrible shock to us and to so many people. He's been recognized as a leading contemporary voice on socialism and new understanding, looking for new insights in that whole area of thinking and acting. He was an insightful thinker, writer, teacher, and a very positive friend and force on our committee. So our event tonight is one small part of Leo's enduring legacy. So I want to thank Leo for that. And tonight's event and the film we are discussing would not make sense without recognizing with gratitude the lands we inhabit and the ancestral peoples of these lands. The film, Trouble in the Garden, was made under the guidance of and in collaborations with 60 Scoop survivors, and we honor the lives of those who did not survive the child welfare system in making the film. The film was made with respect and gratitude on traditional territories of the Anishinaabe people, specifically the Nipissing First Nation, and also on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Nucredit First Nation. We acknowledge the ancestral nations of these territories that we are on now and that we were on when we were making the film. We honor the Robinson-Huron Treaty and the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. The filmmakers support the settlement of outstanding land claims as reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. We are grateful. I know that when we set this up, one of the asks that we made for the event was that people watch the film in advance. Zoom quality for showing a film is not so great. So, but as we know, it's on CBC on GEM, and people are able to watch it. So I'm hoping everyone has seen it, and that'll really seed questions down the line. I'm mentioning this now because if you have some questions that are sort of nebulous, you might take some time over the next few minutes to put a little order to them, perhaps even share them in the chat feature that is on the Zoom panel. Then we'll play the trailer.
Are you gonna tell me about this?
It's only a week, Alice. Wasn't expecting house arrest. Evening.
How can we help you?
Just here to pick up some belongings for Philip of McTavish. This goes by Pippa, Raven McTavish.
Raven, why do you want her stuff?
She's my sister. This is your Aunt Pippa. She'll be staying with us for a little while. Is that exciting? I know she must have had a very difficult time before my parents rescued her.
Is this where you live?
Sometimes. You want to come in?
But you can't keep blaming other people, other things for your own problems. You know?
To family and to Philippa for finding us again.
Her name is Raven.
Oh, I'll try and keep that straight.
Keeping out of trouble, I hope, Philippa.
You too, Dad.
I don't understand how anyone can give away their baby like that.
My mother didn't give me away. I was taken.
We thought that we were giving you a chance at something better. We did the best we could.
You didn't think to tell me your brother's selling houses on the land we're protesting?
I didn't know.
Pippa, the developer bought that land from the government.
Oh, from the government? Well, then it must be okay. It's stolen land.
If you leave this house, they'll throw you right back in jail.
All this is treason. I can stay any goddamn place I want.
You won't be happy until you ruin this family.
I have never been a part of this family. My name is Raven.
That's great. Thank you, Tanner. So that's a refresher for those of us, just to help us get in the right frame of mind for talking about the film. But before we do that, I would just like to properly introduce both our panelists. Roz Owen is, I'll for the purposes of transparency, I'll identify myself as her partner, and she is mine. But she's the writer-director of the film and an award-winning writer-director who works both in drama and documentary and teaches film production at Ryerson University. Roz's films have persistently forefronted stories of strong female characters who grapple with injustice. Portrait of Resistance that we made a few years ago was the feature doc that she and I made about pioneering artist activists Carol Condé and Carl Beveridge, and who are with us tonight. And that film gained critical acclaim in screenings across Canada and internationally. Her short dramas, including the Genie-nominated You Love Me, I Hate You, have shown at festivals around the world. And I guess more recently, in the last few years, that is, sparked by family connections to the 60s scoop and collaboration with Raven Sinclair, the feature drama Trouble in the Garden was made and nominated for awards at many festivals, and is now on CBC GEM and streaming services in 65 countries around the world. Roz is writing a new feature, Split Ends, as she waits out the pandemic so she can direct her next film. So welcome to Roz, who's in the next room. And much close and with us right now, but in Saskatoon is Raven Sinclair. And Raven is executive producer on the film, but much more than that. Raven is a Nahia Cree from Treaty 4, a professor of social work and a 60s scoop survivor activist. Raven's work on issues of Indigenous child welfare, adoption, historical trauma, and recovery was kindled by her own experiences. And in addition to her public advocacy, public speaking, and published academic writings, she has produced the documentary film, A Truth to Be Told, about the removal of children from Splatson First Nation, BC during the 1960s. Through 2019 and 2020, she helped lead the national engagement process with the 60 Scoop survivors that led to the launch last November of the 60 Scoop Healing Foundation. Her creative collaborative work with Roz was key to the making of Trouble in the Garden, and Raven is the mother to a teenage daughter who is the center of her universe. And Raven, we welcome you. I would like, before we launch into conversation, I think it would be really helpful if, Raven, if you could spend a little bit of time giving us a background from your vantage point of the 60 Scoop for our understanding.
Sure. and I know I've only got a few minutes, which is a little bit of torture when you're talking about an area that you've done, you've spent 25 years studying and thinking about and researching. But I think probably the most important points about the scoop, or things to know about it, is that it really refers to the removal of Indigenous children en masse it really started in the late 40s, and it persisted to 1985, at which point a judge in Manitoba, Edwin Killiman, did a child welfare review there and was so horrified by what he was seeing, which was primarily the wholesale movement of children, or relocation of Indigenous children into the Midwest states. And then some of the massive number of discrepancies that he found in child welfare files, that he said that cultural genocide is occurring, without a doubt. And so he placed a moratorium on the transracial adoption of Indigenous children. But the overall impact of that was that it didn't really change the system. We just now have children in foster care. There are still kids who are being adopted, but what's happening now is we've really moved into what I would call the foster care scoop. And we have sort of this unholy alliance between the legal system and child welfare agency policies that are greasing the wheels for the continued removal and placement of our kids into non-Indigenous foster homes, and where they remain until they're 18, and then a large percentage are sort of summarily turfed out of those homes, and it's as problematic as ever. And from my research and drawing upon the work of Cindy Blackstock, the child welfare system really is, the foundation is Indigenous children and families. And it's a massive economy. It's a multi-billion-dollar economy. And it brings a minimum of $3 or $4 million per province, into provincial coffers. And that's not even including federal transfers for, administration salary, that sort of thing, for child welfare agencies and staff and infrastructure. So that's the background. I am a survivor of the 60s scoop. I was placed in 1966 on my 5th birthday, and I was placed into a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant family. Within the first year of being adopted, we moved to West Germany because my father was a professor. He was on sabbatical. So I started school in West Germany. And my experience is far too long to I can't even sort of put it into a nutshell. I almost didn't survive, but, I had enough sort of anchors in my life that I did. And I just decided to go to university to learn about what happened to me, and I've been there ever since. So this area of Indigenous child welfare is really my substantive academic area, and among others. So I think I better stop there. But thanks everybody for coming. It's a very interesting group, I must say.
Thank you so much for that, Raven. And I think I was suggesting that we keep it brief, because I suspect lots will come out to fill in the picture further as we go along through discussion. So
yeah,
I appreciate your brevity, but also the clarity of it. So Roz, I'm thinking it would just, again, if we can just sort of set the stage here for further discussion. If you talk a bit about the early evolution of this project, and then we'll open it up to discussion.
Okay, so in terms of why I made this film, or where the story came from, one of my sister-in-law who we came into our family about 25 years ago. So over the time, she's told these stories about how she was scooped as a baby and all her siblings as well. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was a lot of things I didn't know about this country. And so I felt that the best way I could tell a story, if I didn't know the story, then other people didn't. So if I could tell a dramatic story that would really touch people and make that story understandable, and put everybody in, so that she was in a white family, so a non-Indigenous family, which is a world I know very well, that maybe I could make a film that would touch people and they'd be able to understand what it must have been like. So that's how it started. And certainly I heard Raven speaking on CBC one day, and I just thought she was so eloquent and so her word, like a wordsmith. And I thought, I've got to call her. So I cold called her, and that's how it all started. And she and I had a conversation. As I said, I don't know if you'll know this film. It's called Celebration by Thomas Vinterberg, and it's one of my favorite films, but it was one of the inspirations for writing the script. And Raven said, I have to see that film every 6 months. I love that film. So I knew that we were immediately on the right track because we had a sensibility. But it's been such a joy always to have been able to work together on this. So we went through the script, we went through every line, we went through helping me to understand what the experience was like, to really worked on the script, and then all the way through through the editing, through the music. It's extraordinary music in this film. We had Barbara Kroll was the composer, but we also have a song by Buffy St. Marie and a song by Twin Flames that are friends of Raven's, that is a magical song for the end of the film. So there was Raven and I were involved together all the way through. So it's so great that we're able to do this discussions again about it, because it brings back a lot of great memories for me.
It brings back great memories for us, certainly, but they're pretty fresh impressions from people who have seen the film more recently. So it would be great to open up discussion. And we are such a smaller group, so I'm thinking it would be best to if people want to unmute their mics, and maybe we can have some. I'll ask if there's any questions right now, and if there aren't, then I'll launch into some.
Jim,
yes,
this film, I had watched it when it was on CBC, I guess a year ago or something, and I watched it again this afternoon. It was incredibly emotional for me, because part of my career in teaching was teaching at the First Nations School of Toronto, and we learned this history. The kids, we went over this history. So to me, it was a complete picture of white supremacy and the trauma of the 60s group. And I loved the scene where they were the mother and daughter, and I forget the name of the main character, sorry.
Yeah, Raven. Yeah, I named her after Raven. So yeah.
We're dancing to We Are Circling, which is a song I taught at a folk camp a couple of years ago. And partly because I've been friends with Buffy St. Marie since 1964, and her music needs to be shared. But to me, if I can ask the question, to me, that seemed like the turning point of the film, where the mother and the daughter and the woman bonded.
Mhm.
So that's my question: was that part of your storytelling?
Yeah.
I will let Roz and Raven respond to that. Roz, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the kind of, because she was the one, so the mom who's playing the mom of the young girl, she's watching this family in a way. She's kind of like us as the viewer, because she doesn't know, she knows there's something that happened in the family, she doesn't know, she starts to understand. And so that is the moment where the little girl brings her into the dance, and then they all dance together, and it's a moment of hope before the impending doom of the family arriving in the car on the way from the airport from Scotland with all their colonial stuff,
Yeah.
suitcases full of colonialism. Yeah.
And she's also she's also very, representative of the average Canadian, really not knowing anything about the 60s scoop, the Indigenous child welfare system, like nothing about it. And she does such a beautiful job of being ignorant and naive and innocent in a way, because she's just the product of her socialization, and she's clearly a thinking and a kind, compassionate person, because she has an emotional response that is not, it's not sort of based in stereotypes or any sort of prevailing prevalent racist tendencies. And that's what's really beautiful about her. And as a survivor, there are people that I encountered in my life, that not that many. There were many more that just kind of didn't want to know about it, and maybe said things like, well, are you grateful? There were a few people, I can't remember her name. Is Kelly
Vanderberg?
Yeah. So there were a few people like her, who truly were interested and wanted to learn.
Her grandfather, or whoever you want to call him, was the absolute embodiment of colonial racism. I mean, he played that role to a T. And, when you see in the trailer, it reminds me that she was given the Scottish name, when she was scooped. And so there it is in essence, in so many ways, I mean, anyway. And
it's that story we've all heard people say, oh, my grandfather came here with nothing but the clothes on his back. And he's, I've heard that. I mean, in a way, some of those lines, I've heard them. It's not like I just kind of took them out of having had them repeated by different people in a way. We don't.
I think to Indigenous people, it's often an attack. That's the form of attack, is that, get a job because we worked hard to sort of earn our place here. And, a very interesting and enlightening article is one by Sheila McLean, who is a professor out here in Saskatchewan. And she wrote just a really, you can just basically Google her name, and she wrote a very brief article on that, that challenges that particular, argument or attack, because the truth behind it is that people were given, if we look at it in sort of current day, dollars, people were given the equivalent of like over $1 million in terms of land and land value. And it's sort of like, it's a little bit Trumpian. I started with nothing. Well, you didn't. You started with a $1 million or $2 million inheritance from your father. That's not nothing.
Yeah. No, that is, it's the Protestant work ethic, and it's just, yeah.
I mean, when he says, this is my land, when he angrily approaches the people who are occupying their unceded land, I mean, that's just embodies the whole thing in that one scene. It's, I have to say, I did say this film was really emotional to me, because I've been in that world, you know. And so it's just, I think the film is absolutely a brilliant portrayal of all of it, you know.
Oh, thank you. Well, David, that means a lot. Thank you very much. I mean, it's an incredibly collaborative process making a film, and you know, the actors were. I mean, he really did, and he did a very good job playing that role.
You know, an actor is good when you have such a strong negative response.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, some of the best actors in the world have sort of been vilified because they did such a great job at being the perfect villain. And but they all did. I was absolutely astonished that in so many ways, every one of the actors, they're representative of the characters in the lives of survivors. Because I mean, I have so many friends and peers and colleagues who were scooped, and you know, they said, oh, that was my mother, right? And that was my mother to a certain extent, you know, and just each character, I was astonished. Kara G didn't know anything about the scoop at all, but she did just such a stellar job at embodying all of the sort of the conflicts.
Yeah. And you talked to her, so you know, so Raven would talk to Kara and she asked all these questions, and so she was able to get the really clear information what that experience was like, and she was able to embody it. She's an extraordinary actor. The actors are, I feel like I was so blessed to have such great actors. Yeah,
that's great. I'm going to ask if there's if anyone else has a question that they're feeling.
Ken, I think that's here.
Okay. Yes, please go ahead.
I certainly, no doubt, it's a great movie, it's a story, it's a performance, and the message, no doubt about it. But I particularly like the soundtrack, the ending, the song was actually quite powerful. I was actually curious, before, what was actually the reality that was holding together this family, if you like, quote unquote family, before it fell apart? It seems to me like as soon as the reality kicked in, the actual thing, each one in their own ways, they grasped it, it just fell apart completely. So I was curious, what was the reality that was holding these people together in the first place? In your view, was this really actually intentional to keep it that way, so that there's actually no coherent, no central reality that helped or held this family together, or was meant to be disjointed, and as it was, it's historically, obviously, the way the whole thing had come to be quote unquote family anyways?
I'm going to jump in here because I think it's a really great question and a really astute observation, because it speaks to Roz's brilliance as a director and as someone who understands, you know, the 60s scoop in a way, but really, you know, has sort of an outsider perspective. As an insider, what was interesting to me is just how accurate it was. So you asked what was the, you know, what was it that held this family together prior to, you know, the crisis where we see the dispersal. And I think really what it was, and so many of my peers would agree with this, is that it is for me, it was the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant sensibility, I suppose. You know, the hailing back to sort of Victorian norms of social conventions, of appearances, and doing the right thing, and, you know, having good intentions that weren't necessarily being fulfilled, but still trying to grasp at that and still trying to hold on to sort of some semblance of goodness. And yeah, it's like if we continue to play these roles and carry on this facade, even though we know that there's there's deep flaws here, then we can believe it. And not only can we believe it, but the rest of the world looking in on us can believe it. My mother was, bless her heart, we reconciled, before she passed, but she was very much like, she was sort of a combination of the father and the mother. So she had some, how would I put it? She had some really toxic ways of being in the world, but she was really motivated and really driven by appearances and the facade. So we could have absolute chaos in the house behind closed doors, but once we went out into the world, we had to present a certain way. And, I've struggled with that my whole life.
That's
we internalize those sorts of things, and, whether we're born to a family or not. But yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that lots of times that's the motivation. And the other piece is this belief in that what we've done is very benevolent. So therefore we're really good people.
Okay.
And it's important for us to maintain that illusion for ourselves, or delusion for ourselves, and illusion for the outside world.
Yeah, that's very well put. It's very, very interesting. I think it is a lot about appearances, and it's a lot about wanting to do the right thing and looking as though you're doing the right thing. But it's also, from a selfish way, the mum, the Fiona Reid character, she wanted more children, and she was unable to have more children. And this was a solution to that problem, which to me, the character, the dad, wanted her to be happy, but didn't really want this to happen. And so but she was very insistent. This is sort of backstory stuff, but that this was, and that she was going to smooth it all over and make it work. So when there was a pregnancy in the family, and the daughter, it was the son who could do no wrong. And the kind of, with a natural child, that's when she loses her temper at the table like that, and says, and is so clear, that's what that's about. So the best way to cover that up is just blame her and he's fine. So that's part of, I think, also being a woman director, I have to say, growing up in this world where it feels like, women can make very few mistakes and men seem to be able to make quite a lot more and not pay for it the same way. Changing, but there is something in that, I think.
I thought at that point was innate white supremacy, unconscious, but absolutely what came out of her mouth.
If I may come back on that, just one quick comment. Basically, I would have loved to have seen the immigrant mythology a bit more expanded, or the benevolence. The benevolence basically was expressed in the context of the mother, and also they say, well, this is the best we could do, this is the good for you, and so on. Those two, and the immigrant mythology, the fact that, came with nothing and then look what I got, and so on, would have been really nice to see. In other words, I was looking for where is the vehicle to carry me to develop a profound, comprehensive empathy through the narrative or through the characters. Anyways, thanks for the response.
The locating of the story in the way you did it, the way you imagined it, I think relates to this. And you were speaking a bit about it earlier, but I'm just thinking maybe this is a useful time to expand on that a little bit more. In terms of holding this story within, I mean, it's partly budgetary in the sense of having it, having one principal location, but that's not the real justification for where the story is located. And I think Raven can also speak to that in the sense of what the experience of being between, it seems evident in the story, and I think from what what we know from what Raven has told us in other research about the difficulty of scoop survivors being sort of torn between these two cultures. So that's a linked question, I guess. One, maybe Roz, you could speak first about the.
Okay. Well, you want you. Well, the thing. Well, I mean, I could say that, you know, Raven, the character is the land, and the family is Canada. So you could look at it in that way, sort of metaphorically. But in terms of land, I mean, I think the way we Canadians and colonialism is all about how we got the land. So, and also, so is taking people's children away, because that's so devastating that it's really hard to fight if, and Raven does say that, the character does say that at some point, why didn't you fight? And then you find out about the fact that Indigenous people couldn't vote until 1960. They couldn't hire a lawyer. They couldn't become a lawyer. It was illegal. So you find like all these things that we seem to not know. I was trying to kind of embed them in there, but I think is that what you're asking, Jim?
Well, it's certainly a good question. I think so. It relates. I'm thinking of how by locating it in this familiar place to so many non-Indigenous settler Canadians, you're sort of instead of it being a story that's far away and in time and place, and injustices that seem maybe terrible but distant, it brings it home.
I want to bring it into a family that were relatable, and that weren't, I'm not a fan of really awful, terrible character. I like to see that there's this conflict in the characters, that there's, well-meaning but terrible mistakes. I just wanted for non-Indigenous Canadians to be able to see themselves. This one guy actually came up to us after a screening in North Bay and said, I saw myself in that character, and I am so ashamed. Like, it was sort of a visceral, some people have a visceral response. Anyway, if anything, as a filmmaker, that I really hope that I can do is to have an opportunity to flip somebody's thinking so that it just is a bit, turn the tables, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite moments were when we're hearing people gasp. and some of the reactions. And what was interesting too is watching it with some of my peers who had gone through the same experience, and observing that there were lots of times where we laughed where no one else did.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
So what that tells me is that the film just managed to meet lots of needs and speak to people regardless of where they're at in it, because it represents everybody, right? Survivors, anybody involved in the child welfare system, people who knew nothing about it, people who have that belief in the settler myth. For me, one of the really important things that came out of it was it really reminded me that, so we had a class action lawsuit that we won, and out of that came this Healing Foundation. And, perhaps it's just a result of being self-centered. I never realized, like, there's approximately 22,400 status Indian and Inuit survivors of the scoop, who were placed primarily through adoption, but some through long-term foster care, through permanency orders. And, when I think about it, that means that there's probably over 100,000 non-Indigenous family members and extended family members who also have direct experience of the scoop. And I never thought about them. I rarely thought about them sort of beyond my own siblings, because, I've watched them. My adoptive parents are both deceased now, but the experience of the relationship that I've had with my two brothers and my sister, my adopted siblings, it's really been a journey of sort of watching them come to terms with what happened to our whole family, and it wasn't just me. And even going back into my birth family, I reacculturated. I moved back to Saskatoon, in my late 20s to just reconnect with them. And two of my younger siblings were adopted, two of my older brothers were adopted, and the rest were in foster care. And I never even thought about them as 60 Scoop survivors, because I was isolated. I was really brought up in this WASP enclave, and but they were intensely affected by the Scoop. They're survivors as well, just from a different perspective. So just this process of being involved in the film really has sort of expanded my perspective on it, and I think I probably feel more compassion for everyone involved, because generally on the whole it wasn't a very successful project. And there's the sort of the small percentage where it was just perfect, it was great. And I always say that I think that's really what the child welfare system is supposed to do. It's supposed to support children and families, and when children have to be permanently placed, then they're going to be in a family that's truly loving and nurturing, and the whole family sort of becomes this unique entity. For the most part, though, for survivors, my parents were very well intentioned, but racist. And it's a little bit difficult to say, because my father, when I was older and he was more mature, he started to really think about racism and sort of what is required for all of us to confront our own racism. And so, as a survivor of the Scoop, who was socialized in a WASP context, where it was sort of part of my socialization was to judge other people according to race and class, and I was quite privileged growing up. And so when my father and I started talking about racism, and he was explaining to me about his own process, I started to think about my own racism, and and the fact that as a young adult, I didn't want to be Indigenous, first of all, just because of all the stereotypes and the racism that I had internalized. But I classified people according to lots of different criteria, socioeconomic, ethnic, and so on. And for many of us, that's been one of the most challenging pieces, is confronting our own racism that we learned. And but it's been a really, really great process for me to step a little bit outside myself and reflect upon the impact for everyone involved, even including social workers, who now, I think, I'm doing a research project, and I've had a chance to interview many of them. And my research team, we talk about these things, and what they observe is that there's the fragility to many of the individuals who worked in the system, because now they know better. At the time, they were, I think, like many adoptive families, they thought they were doing a good thing. They thought that they were, rescuing children in need. And so now that they have a bigger picture, that's really tough, and so how do you honor the fact that someone had good intentions, but then it didn't sort of pan out that way?
Raven, have your siblings gone through a similar process?
My birth siblings or my adoptive siblings?
Your birth siblings.
No, because they all stayed in Saskatoon except for me, a younger sister, and a younger brother. We were all adopted and moved away. So I grew up primarily in like Toronto and Kingston. And my younger brother grew up in Vancouver, and my younger sister grew up in Saltcoats. And what's really interesting story there is that my father was a professor of theology, and he taught my sister's father, who eventually became the moderator of the United Church. And so as young children, just shortly after we were adopted, they would come and visit, and we would play together. And we didn't know, they didn't know, and we didn't know that we were siblings.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The tragic part is that both of the younger ones did not make their way back. They've not returned sort of to the family unit. They've both come in sort of to visit and say hello, but my sister in particular is very much sort of taken on that identity of her adopted family and the culture and so on. Yeah.
There's been a recent discussion about people who feel they're actually not, because of their background, whether it's Black or Indigenous, not worthy to be in the room. That's a question that I've read about in the last month, maybe. And that's an interesting sort of a look at it.
Worthy to be in the room in what sense, David? Or
it's a sense of where I watched a talk of some Black panelists and women, and which is a double thing, of course, sex and race, and they would feel, and it was actually about scientists. It was on Quirks and Quarks today, and it was about Black people in science and how their opinions and insights were disregarded, even though they'd written dozens of papers and they were true experts and all that kind of thing. And they were made to feel, and they said this, not worthy to have an opinion. And sometimes in scientific gatherings or meetings, they would just shut up, even though they were the smartest person in the room, so, or the most knowledgeable or whatever. And I was just curious whether Raven would have any insight into that kind of feeling.
Right.
Well, one of the beautiful things about getting older is you have lots of insights and lots of opinions. So yes, well, I'm a professor, and I certainly resonate with that, because I think when I was a bit younger, when I was first starting out, I think many people who start in academia, we have imposter syndrome. And I don't have that anymore, but I do recognize that there seems to be there, and it's white supremacy, right? It's a very subtle undercurrent that is very constant, and it's only occasionally disrupted when we have new people come into the faculty, or when our leadership changes and they actually have an understanding of racism and white supremacy. But yeah, there's and it's some of the women. The subtle messaging is that I'm dismissible, and yeah. So over the years, I mean, I have lots of ideas and suggestions, and I mean, there were deans that, I mean, didn't even respond. And fortunately now I have a dean who is taking me up on some of those great ideas. And so, but it's interesting to be in meetings and just, see some people's responses to me being a little bit more centered in the activities of our faculty. I mean, I see the outright,
Right.
Or, oh, Raven's talking, I'll just shut my video off and, walk away or something. And that's constant. That's the reality of being in a racialized society. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question, David, but I certainly understand that.
Yeah, I was asked when I was 20 years old, and I went down to register Black voters in Mississippi. And when the first question, they interviewed us to see if we were ready to do it. And the guy asked me, are you willing to take leadership from Negroes, as it was the term at the time? And my response to him was, he was a Black SNCC worker from Mississippi. And I said, well, you know way more about it than I do. So of course I'm going to be learning from you, which is the same feeling I had when I started at the First Nations school. I thought I knew I had a whole lot to learn. And so I did a lot of learning and listening too, you know, because I haven't lived their lives, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, that's just the respect that you have to give to people who have lives, who are, you know, generally part of a group of people who've been oppressed. So I guess that was the most direct way I was ever asked that. And I thought, whoa, you're right. You know more about this than I do. So I'm the one who's here to learn. And I don't know. I mean, I guess that's the first time I was challenged that way. So it sort of stuck with me. But,
right.
You know, and this is what settlers, you know, I don't have to learn, that they have a lot to learn, I guess.
So
no, that's well put. I think that is true. But we don't, it's hard because when that whole being a settler has given you already the privilege of thinking that you know everything, right? Which is very bad. Just why we're trying to kind of flip the thinking to, yeah.
Well, I don't know how bad it is, but it's normative, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, so disrupting that can cause people who, you know, aren't in the habit of being critical thinkers. It can be very, very threatening. And you know, I one way of understanding sort of what happens with my own colleagues is that even though they work in the helping profession and are teaching, and so, you know, I'm going to assume they have sort of a, you know, more knowledge in terms of theory, you know, a vast array of theories and knowledge and insights. It doesn't necessarily follow that there's a gap between the translation from theory to practice. And, you know, academics, we use our minds all the time. So we can learn a lot about a topic. We can learn all about the theory. We can even articulate the methods and the practices, but whether we can actually implement those in our own lives is another matter. So ask any academic
here.
Yeah, ask any academic about, you know, about racism and oppression as theories, and they can probably talk your ear off. Ask them if they've got an Indigenous friend.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this discussion sort of leads to where the film concludes, and this sort of the mess that it leaves the characters in, but also the question of, you know, the film ends and where does it go from there? And I think, I mean, certainly we've talked about it, but Roz and Raven, why don't you speak a little bit about the end and the thoughts around it and how you see really the film playing in the
can
world.
tell you, I mean, I can say what the intention was. I don't know how people felt at the end. You know, I don't know if that's something that people want me to say what the intention was, or maybe people just want to say how they felt at the end.
Yeah, that's true. We could.
I'd love to hear that.
Yeah,
I'd
that'd
really
be
love
great.
to hear that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
Yeah,
please.
yeah.
Thanks. One of the things that I really liked about the film, which is, you know, the classically what makes great film and great literature is the layering in the film. And I found that, and talking about the end brings me to this, I found it fascinating that there was this story that was essentially a psychological crisis in a family that had that was unknown to us throughout the film, but was driving so much that happens in the film. So there's this tight, focused crisis, psychological crisis, emotional crisis, family crisis that is contained by this larger crisis, which is a crisis of our country, which is the crisis of racism and colonialism and that inside of that is this other crisis, and the two kind of explode together kind of wonderfully in the end. Right. I confess to having been shocked right. by the ending, but on the other hand, feeling all along that there was much more to this story than we were told up until that point. I just thought I'd throw that in because you were about to talk about the ending, but I found that very, very really fine filmmaking.
Oh, that's a lovely response. Because we want, like, one of the things, I mean, Raven, when you did your research and you said of the 200 people that you had interviewed, that there were only two or three that actually hadn't had some sort of interference from the family, some sort of incest within the family, which was so shocking that it seemed like that was like it had to be there. It had to have happened within that family. And that was the smoothing over of just wanting to make it all fine. But that underneath there was that kind of, yeah. So I hope that you can't put your finger on it, but there's something underneath.
Yes.
That, yeah. So I'm very grateful that you had that response, because that's what we were intending. Yeah.
And in terms of the sort of aftermath of the crisis,
I guess, do you want me to talk about it or other people? Or?
Well, actually, welcome actually more activity, more response from people who have seen it more recently. That would be terrific. And I know, go ahead.
Well, I mean, that it was a shattering event. It was a shattering event, which is going to shatter the family in so many ways that, we can't begin to understand. The wife gets in the car and drives away and takes her child, and the parents, how do they cope with that event in their past, having shattered the lives of all of these people in this room, the 6 people in this room together. So, at the shock of that moment, and then the feeling that there's just this splintering that transpires as a result of all of that. One kind of feels that Raven is the only one that's kind of secure and safe at the end in some bizarre kind of way, that she has her people, she has her friends and her colleagues and her fellow protesters and the family that she's created for herself that is so much more embracing than the family that she's lived with or that she had lived with all those years.
And at least she's finally able to say it. The truth is out. Right. So nobody can really just go back to pretending that was the intention, that she was able to say it clearly and put it out. So there was no disputing it anymore.
Right.
And her ability to do that, and then to make the really clear decision that being arrested was preferable to participating in the facade any longer. really, I mean, was the culmination of, you know, her own years long process of coming to terms with the issues. And and the way that we see that, you know, leading up to the crisis point is that she appears to be just cranky. But to me, how I understand that, it's just that sort of internal frustration and discomfort and lack of ease with the facade that everyone is desperately trying to maintain. So when I look at it, the two sort of same people are Raven and then the character played by Kelly. What's that?
Alice, the mom. Alice.
Yeah, because Alice's response is it's a perfect response to an absolutely horrific and untenable situation. And the rest of the, you know, the players are the mother and father. I mean, the son is just an absolute turmoil, but the mother and father are still desperately trying to maintain the facade. And the only way to do that is to attack and to blame, you know, to dispossess themselves of any sort of responsibility for what happened. And that is so common, so prevalent in survivor experiences. Not every single survivor was sexually abused, you know, in terms of intrafamilial, but abuse is really, really prevalent in survivor experiences. And it may be psychological, may have been psychological abuse as well, which is very, very subtle, right?
Denying their adopted daughter's identity completely and then taking the illegitimate so-called child away from her. You know, I mean, I thought, I mean, maybe I said it before, but I thought the final scene with the mother and daughter leaving was for her an understanding and an act, her own personal act of reconciliation, you know. So, and I mean, I thought in some ways it was so fitting because she had to get away from these toxic, racist people after coming to see Raven as a true, whole human being. The scene, you know, that I mentioned before about them dancing to We Are Circling, and there was that emotional connection that took place. And then once she heard the story of the quite possibly rape and the child who was flung to the winds, probably put out for adoption somewhere, turned over to CAS or whatever they did, you know, it's just, I mean, I think the ending was exactly what it should have been.
Oh.
Well, yeah, which is in turmoil. I mean, I feel that the intent there was, you know, especially as the film was being developed, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was releasing its results, and it certainly, you know, was very prevalent on people's minds over that time, and hopefully continues to be. But it's the film is constructed to say that that there has to be a reckoning before there's going to be reconciliation. And
we can't have reconciliation until the truth is told.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that I happened to help my granddaughter with a letter she was tasked with writing to the Prime Minister about that subject of reconciliation. And I said, okay, go and look, and we'll talk about how many of the recommendations have been implemented. And of the 94, there were like 5. And one of them was the missing and murdered inquiry. And none of the major recommendations of either of those has ever been implemented. And so when my granddaughter learned that, she was outraged, you know, and I mean, good for her. She's really smart.
No, that's great. We need the next generation.
They need to understand.
Yeah.
A comment on more like a follow-up on the question that Jim raised, and back again as an audience, as somebody seeing the film, was your intent to give us clues as to where this all going? The end, in other words, each one of the characters of the 6 people, all of them went to some kind of reality out there in the real world or the outside world, outside the family. So are we to get some clues as to what do you want us to do with this thing, with this narrative, with this story? Where do you want us to go and through which character? It seems like there's so many different places to go. Of course, the parent, those people are stuck in the history, and there's almost absolutely no hope for those people to allow anyone to go with them or talk with them or anything like that. They're basically back in the history of colonialism, the whole baggage that they brought in and what they inherited. So I'm just kind of curious to what your intentions were, Roz, and others, everybody involved in this film, not just you. Where do you want us to go, or what do you want us to do with it, with this reality that we got exposed to through this totally disjointed family? But on the other hand, they lived comfortably under a facade until it blew into pieces.
Well, they won't be able to go on quite the same way. So something shifted. So like we can't, and if the truth's told, then we can move on from there, but we can't keep covering up things. We've just got to keep, at this point. And I think she's, the Raven character is a hero. Well, our Raven too, but is a hero to the people who see the film, because she's stood her ground. She said it. That's what she needed to do. That's what she had to do. We can't keep going on as way we are, pretending everything's really fine and we're the most lovely country in the whole world. That's, generous and always, that's the way we like to see ourselves, but we've got our own baggage hidden. So maybe it's time we're really honest about that. I guess that's what I hope what people would think.
Yes, please. Please speak, Rosemary.
Well, I really appreciate this discussion about deception, how the deception of Canada as a colonial nation, and the film really spoke. I really appreciated how the film did bring out the colonial nature of Canada, but the deception also goes to us as immigrants. I'm an immigrant, and the deception of the immigrant, of where they came from. I enjoyed the way in which the Scots, were going back to Scotland as some kind of tourist thing, and searching for their ancestors, and completely deceived that their ancestors had been driven off the land by the English and the aristocracy to clear the land, so that the land could be profited on by raising sheep, etc., and by other landholders. So the deception is not only about Canada and its colonialism and how we treat the Indigenous people whose land we've taken, but it's also deception about ourselves and as immigrants coming, and unwilling to really call out, the Queen and all this stuff, right? We live with all this trappings of colonialism and just accept it.
One of the
very well put.
We deceive ourselves continually as immigrants coming, with our hard work.
Yeah.
One of the places that I observed that there was laughter amongst my peers is that scene on the porch where where the mother and father are talking about, they're going on about their trip. And the mother says, oh, you know how important his history is to him.
Yes.
And the raw irony between that and the fact that they completely disregard that Raven has any history that she might be connected to. It's like just.
Yeah. And the fact that the grandmother, as you're pointing out, Rosemary, I mean, she sort of says, well, wouldn't it be lovely if we lived in the Crofters' house? She's sort of identifying with their own oppressors from back in Scotland, right? So it really raises those curious and vexing kinds of self-delusions that can really take hold, I think.
Well, the Crofters were oppressed by the next lot, though.
Right.
They were small landholders
Yeah.
who had to give money, had to raise anyhow.
Yeah.
So
it's just that
it's just cycles of oppression.
Right.
Yeah. And everybody wanting
to visit on other people. Huh?
Yeah, that's the cycle. So then we've been badly treated. So we go, okay, well, that's how it works. So yes, so I'm better than that person. It's just this flaw in humans that maybe it's good that we just, have a look at ourselves a little bit more.
The other embedded irony is that, the Scots were a tribal people.
Yes.
I mean, I have Scottish ancestry, so I also took some delight in that, the incorporation of that desire to, look for roots and be connected to something, and knowing a little bit about the tribal, the clan heritage.
Well, there are some.
David, I'm just going to Sue Finley's been raising her hand, and I've been well recognized it. Do you have a comment or question or both?
I saw it the second time today, and so it just raised all sorts of new questions. When I first saw it, I was really, I just thought, well, nothing's happening. And just what you said, Roz, earlier, if you can't tell the truth, and I think that's what this film is all about, is it's been impossible to tell the truth. There won't be any reconciliation. And I just wonder, though, after this talk too has been great, because it just adds layers of complexity. And I mean, we just go on and talk about it. It's so important. So I wondered, I had a question when I was thinking about it this afternoon about moving forward, because I think all of the characters maybe at some point talk about moving forward, but of course they all think of it differently. It's very, it's very fraught or shaped by their particular sets of complexity. So I mean, in a way, maybe you need to do a sequel. We need to carry on, because it's just, I think in the end, what I think you've done, which is really, really important. This comes, I'm trained as a psychoanalyst, and what we're trying to talk about in terms of making change is perturbing people, or people, what is it? There's a noun that gets made from perturbing, the verb, and I can't really say it's pertur something other. Anyway, it's just really basically that people have to be upset before they can move forward. They have to be almost like broken apart. And that's a strong way of putting it, particularly when a lot of this stuff is all about trauma and the complexity of trauma, or the way in which the specificity for the trauma of almost all of those individuals, except Alice. But then she, of course, is visited by a really quite severe trauma. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, I think I'm left now not feeling quite so hopeless, but more aware, I think of the importance of doing films that shake us up, that show people being shaken up, so that they can develop a different sense of how to speak. I keep using this term. I got to figure out a better term, but speaking across difference is one thing. So it might be okay. Raven might be better. I'm not sure. Because I just feel that she feels uneasy with her partner, the Indigenous guy who comes to the tent. I can't remember his name. But I feel an uneasiness in her. So I don't think she's either. She's not
Well, I think that's partly too that you know when you don't belong in either world.
Yeah.
And I'm very drawn to tell stories about being an outsider.
Yeah.
Because it's really interesting. And I guess growing up, I felt I was, so therefore, I can just draw on things. But, I think that is very difficult from what I understand from talking to a number of 60 Scoop survivors, that you don't really feel you belong in either world. I don't know, Raven, if you want to take that on.
I just want to acknowledge that, Craig, you've had your hand up, so I'll just quickly throw in my 2 cents here, and that is that I think I'm hoping that part of what's happening is that people don't really recognize Raven's response in the end. Because how could you possibly recognize that response when you wouldn't know the process for her of reconciliation? For me and many of my, my network who have talked about these issues, and we have a very strong connection and have talked deeply about our different experiences. The way that we read the character at the end is that that this was a really essential part of her own reconciliation with herself. And the tragedy is that that doesn't resemble the happy ending, the happy Hollywood ending that anyone is going to be familiar with. Because the reality is, as Indigenous people, sometimes our reconciliation means that we have to leave a situation because it's untenable, and that takes fortitude, and but it's okay because when you live as an Indigenous person, you become used to these things, and you develop those strategies, and some of what we know in terms of recovery and dealing with racism and colonialism is that it is a very inward sort of journey. So she really does sort of embody that in a perfect way, that it's not a happy ending that people are necessarily going to recognize, but we recognize it as that she is reconciled. She said what she needed to say. It's not a happy ending for other people, but she had to do it. She had to sort of hand that whole plate of shit back and say, this is not mine. And then the reconciliation for the family, I mean, we don't get to see that, of course. It's very messy, but we can imagine that, the different sort of routes that people will take to find their own reconciliation. And for some of the characters, like the father, it might be even more entrenched denial. Yeah. So I just want to invite Craig to speak.
Yeah, and Craig, and I think also Tanner, you had a question too. So Craig,
but just before I say what I was going to say, because I may not get a chance to say this part, it is a beautiful film and an extremely well crafted film on every level. Wonderful script, fantastic acting, cinematography was really excellent. I found it really gripping in all sorts of ways. And obviously the politics of the film really made it that much more interesting for someone with my sensibilities. But one of the things we haven't talked about is the political aspect of the film that was the context in which this family was sorting out its difficulties, which was the activism of the Indigenous community. And I was so pleased to see that Raven was actually a credible activist. She was she was articulate, she was principled and thoughtful, and she wasn't so often in films you're presented with a horrible racist oppressive situation in which the main character is flying off in some madness or finding some very individualistic solution, but she is not. And the moment when it's clear that she's winning over Alice is one part of it, but she's part of a struggle that's just convincing a judge to slow down the process of this transformation of their community, of the land. Now that isn't resolved in the film, but it's I think very well presented part of the story, in the sense that she's found her way back to her people in a very positive and forward-looking way, to pick up Sue's question, that there is a possibility and the importance of us listening to that possibility is presented very loud and clear. And I really like that part of it. I mean, she's such a, I mean, the actress was wonderful, but the part was so compelling for the trauma she was going through, but also the way in which she was dealing with it through her activism, which was really quite powerful and compelling.
That's really lovely to
great.
hear that. I wanted her to be a hero. I wanted her to be not a simple hero, no, just, but, but I wanted her to be able to stand up and say it finally at the end. But she can speak. I like the scenes with her brother because he's such a sellout, right? He's just, he just like, he knew he did this thing and he really wanted it to go away. And he just thought maybe he could fix it by just, saving her. She didn't really saved. She didn't need his help. So
she was a totally believable hero.
Yes.
There was no denial, wasn't that? So, I mean, in that that I could sense uneasiness, that's fine to go with that kind of hero that Craig was just.
The mentality of the brother who said, I've got a lawyer for you. And she turns on him and said, I've already got a lawyer.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that was a moment of just real strength and getting at his, I don't know, colonial, patriarchal, or whatever you want to call it, attitude.
Well, I just, at a certain point, just thinking about she's a land activist and he's selling houses on the very land she's protesting. It just like, that's like Canada to me, was just like a way of doing that.
I have to interject now before Tanner comes in, just to introduce the sort of back note that the golf course that the scene was shot on, where the brother, the father, and the lawyer meet, it was actually a golf course set up by Mike Harris, and who Rose and I were.
We all remember Ippawash.
Yeah, so that felt
horrible Ippawash, where
we railed against Mike Harris for years while he was in office. So it felt really, really funny being on that.
Like, oh my God,
on that so-called property of theirs. When we're making this film about something else altogether. Tanner, would you like to please go ahead?
Sure, thanks so much. No, I share everyone's sentiment. This was an absolutely moving, incredible film, and I really sort of appreciate having had the opportunity to watch it today. And thank you so much for your work on it. Picking up on Craig's comments with regard to the representation of the activist, which was so powerful. I just am curious, sort of, in a general sense, how do you see the relationship between film and contemporary politics and social transformation? And then secondarily, in a more specific way, what sort of for you would be the most significant impact this film could have among viewers in society at the political level? And so those are sort of, a broad set of questions, but it just sort of probes the relationship between film and politics in this particular film and politics today. Thank you so much for your work, both.
Should I take?
Yes, please, Russ.
So, well, I guess I can't help but have politics in, it's life. So but I guess I have certainly have a drive to make I want characters to be real, and I want them to be emotional, and I want them to be complex, because I don't want it to be a simple story. So therefore, what I hope is that the characters stay in people's minds, that you're trying to work it out, because I didn't want to give all the answers so that you are stuck thinking about it. So I hope that I can continue to make films that are political, but that are also emotional. So that's really, to me, that's really important. But that's my thing, I guess. Yeah.
Can I ask you if there's a possibility of running with this film and showing it places, wherever, colleges, universities, or do you see any further distribution, take it to places and have?
Well, I think that like, this is my version and Raven's version. And in a way, I feel like, I hope that it continues to have a life to it, but there's also amazing films being made by Indigenous filmmakers who are telling their own story. So I think this is just one piece of it. It's one part of a stories that need to be told. I mean, it's right now, it's actually in 65 countries on the dreaded Prime Video. But it's for like a film that was, you know, a low budget film shot in 12 days. It's kind of done. I'm pleased, but I hear what you're saying in terms of universities. I mean, I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
Is that the answer?
Yeah, I'd like to see it in every school of social work across the country. For sure. Yeah.
That was one of the things I wanted to ask you, Raven, about. Is my voice?
Yeah, we're hearing you.
Yeah, I just wondered if you've seen changes over the time that you've been working on this stuff in terms of what gets into the school systems. Because somebody said to me, well, doesn't everybody, well, sort of like, Roz, you didn't know about this until it came into your sort of personal life through your sister. And, you know, other people don't know either. I didn't know about Scoop in particular, and I had been involved in research projects with residential schools in the 60s. So like, you know, the knowledge is, I'm just wondering whether there has been a shift in the last, you know, 20 years, 10 years, I don't know.
Well, I ask my students every year and they don't know about the 60s Scoop.
Yeah.
So I think somehow we have to keep the information being out in the world because it is, it's really important that people understand what country, you know, who we are. It would be great, Raven, if we could get it into universities' social work. That would be fantastic.
I can't believe it isn't in there. I can't.
We need to talk. We need to talk about that. You know, the three of us, but everyone. Would be great to get ideas following up from this. Raven, I wanted to, at some point, we're going to conclude, but I want to before that to just have you talk a little bit about the current state of Indigenous child welfare and I guess the needs the things that need to come to people's attention now, and what's happening to deal with it.
And I will briefly, but I just want to speak to what Suzanne just talked about. And
please.
So, I mean, in terms of general, you know, Indigenous history as part of Canadian history, I think that things have changed a little bit. We have, you know, this push to treaty education. And I know that my daughter, who's about to turn 16, she got a lot more information than I ever did in school. But yeah, I mean, we definitely need more information, you know, more stories like this. And there are more, you know, like Tasha Hubbard's done some amazing work.
Yeah,
and
brilliant filmmaker. Brilliant.
But again, it's up to individual profs, what sort of content they bring into the classroom. And so there are some that use, you know, some of my material. I'm not sure if any have actually shown this film. And then the other sort of point that I wanted to speak to, and I can't remember who said it, but it might have been David. The question was around, you know, what do we want to sort of leave people with? And for me, I'm really content that the film is unsettling, because it needs to be. It needs to be. And I mean, colonialism, I just did a talk that I think Jim is going to leave a link. And so that really has lots and lots of details about the scoop and sort of, you know, the contemporary manifestation of that, which is the continued removal of our children only through different machinations. And those are, it's like a combination of legalities and so child welfare policies, agency policy. And it's creating this sort of recipe for removal that that allows for our kids to be put into foster care under permanency orders. And it's feeding into the child welfare economy that is massive. It's absolutely massive. But in terms of the film and what I want is, and people won't necessarily be conscious of this, but I do want people to be unsettled and perhaps to recognize that. I mean, my interpretation of the crisis scene and the aftermath of it is that colonization really is about dehumanization, and the whole sort of problematics around missing and murdered Indigenous women and missing and murdered Indigenous men. It's one of the outcomes of that, that dehumanizing piece that is a foundational, it's an underpinning of colonialism, because you can't commit acts of genocide or even colonialism or racism unless you have dehumanized people to a certain extent. And we see that that's what happened with Raven in the film, is that she's really constructed a certain way by the family, and in the end, it's like, we know that she's her own person, and we don't really know what that is, but we also know that there's going to be some sort of an aftermath for the three players who are left at the house, so the mother, the father, and the son. And that's the reality, that there are consequences for sort of blindly adhering to this, to a colonial mindset or a colonial perspective. There always are. There always are. We can't. It's like natural law. At least that's how I understand it from my own, Cree knowledge, is that natural law plays, and at some point, like, this crisis had to happen in order to recover a balance for Raven primarily, but even in the family, to recover a balance for them, because they were living this illusion. And it's a metaphor for Canadian society, really. We really need to look at these. We need to tell the stories that tell these really raw truths around what colonialism really is, and that it's something that we really can't ignore. We shouldn't ignore. If we, as Canadians, if we want to believe this sort of mythology that we're ethical and moral beings, then we need to do a little bit more work to meet the mark, I think.
Yeah. It's very well put. It's excellent. Really. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was one, I'll just say briefly, because it just was coming to mind, but George Orwell, the quote that was kind of at the heart of the film was, if you want to keep a secret, you must first keep it from yourself. And I thought that was, so that's kind of throughout the film. But that was beautifully said, Raven, what you were speaking about just then.
And when we were searching for titles, I think unsettling was one of the words that really resonated. I think that's something. I know we'll conclude soon, but is there anyone else who I've neglected to recognize in terms of having something to say? So I think this is
Susan. I think Susan.
Susan, were you going to say something, Susan? Sue?
Yeah, I've put it in the chat, but
okay.
This has been a very powerful discussion. I haven't seen the film. I heard about it through the Black History Month Socialist Project, which is what brought me to it.
Great.
And I have friends, one new friend who went through the 60s scoop. He's teaching me how to weave cedar, young Haida fella, and two other friends from 96 when we did the Women's March across the country, who went through the residential school system. And but we heard nothing about it when we were going to school. We knew nothing about what was going on. So it's really powerful. Thank you very much.
Thanks for adding that, Susan. Well, it's been really wonderful for me to be trying to guide this conversation, and I know I can hear Rosalind's in the next room. I think we're both really appreciative, and it's been great having you to join us from Saskatoon tonight, Raven.
Oh, it's really lovely. It is. You've got. It's. I can't do this without you.
Yeah, I think
Great. It feels like a Friday night party or something, but
I wish.
It was, the one thing about when you show a film with a room full of people, it is, you do hear people laughing and think it's so, this bleak time that we're in where we're all separate in little boxes on screens is, I hope it's over soon.
Yeah. It's not, we had an event last week that had 200 plus people at it, and which was wonderful, but this has been a great intimately scaled group and good conversation. I do, and we do encourage everybody who's seen the film and who feels strongly about it to let other people know, because it is available on CBC for some time, to probably another year and a half, I believe. And I've left a link to the talk that Raven gave just in the last couple of weeks, I think, out at BC. What was the event once again? It was an inaugural event for... more about the contemporary circumstance of Indigenous child welfare issues and so on. The whole thing, yeah. So anyway, that's there. That would be that's a resource. The link is on the side there. But I think Tanner, we should wrap this up, and I will appreciate everyone who's come tonight and spread the word about the film, because that's how it'll keep alive and keep people getting unsettled and thinking about these things.
Thank you.
I do wish we could continue the conversation too.
That we could continue the conversation, yes, absolutely, among ourselves here and beyond.
Well, let's hang out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was lovely. It was it was lovely to meet you all on Zoom, and hopefully soon in person somehow.
Yes, that'd be great.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A really great conversation.
Thank you. Really, thank you all so much for great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Con. Thank you, David. Thank you, Carl, and everybody. Thanks very much. Great to see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.